I stood on my mother's porch with my 3 children behind me, a garbage bag sitting at my feet, and I knocked on that door the way I had countless times throughout my life. My own parents' home, a place I'd always known as safe, and they shut it right in my face with my kids watching. My brother smirked. My sister delivered a speech, and standing there on that porch, I made myself a single promise. Just 3 words. Watch what happens. This is what happened. My name is Coralie, and 18 months ago, most people looking at my life from the outside would have called it perfectly fine. Not extraordinary, not the kind of life that fills up your social media with envy-filled comments, but solid and manageable. I had a house with a functioning dishwasher, a minivan with a cracked taillight I never quite got around to fixing, and 3 children growing so quickly that blinking felt dangerous, like I might miss an entire chapter of their lives. Saren was 9, thoughtful and careful, already the type of child who reads every instruction before tearing open a box. Kayla was 6, loud and untamed, absolutely convinced she could take flight if her belief was strong enough. And Arlo was 4, still small enough to drift off in my arms, still trusting enough to believe I could solve anything in the world. I also had Caspian. We had spent 10 years married, long enough that I had genuinely forgotten who I was before him. Which is something nobody ever warns you about, the way you can gradually disappear inside a marriage without ever realizing it's happening. He wasn't monstrous. That actually would have been simpler. Monsters are easy to identify. Caspian was magnetic, unpredictable, and deeply resistant to ever owning his mistakes. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice yet somehow managed to make you feel, quietly and completely, that everything that went wrong was your fault. The fractures had existed for years. I had simply become skilled at concealing them. I worked part-time managing medical records, nothing glamorous but reliable. I ran the household, tracked the school calendars, handled the grocery runs, the pediatric checkups, the permission slips, the birthday parties, the 2 a.m. nightmares. Caspian dedicated himself to his career with the devotion of a true believer. Sales director at a logistics company, strong income, long hours, constant travel, and tucked somewhere inside all those business trips, he had found someone else. I discovered it the way many women do, not through some climactic showdown, but through an accidental text on a phone he left unlocked on the kitchen counter. 3 sentences. That was the entirety of it. 3 sentences and a decade collapsed in under a minute. I won't walk through what the weeks that followed looked like. Certain kinds of pain are too intimate to hand to strangers. What I will tell you is that we made a brief, unsuccessful attempt to salvage things. Caspian said all the appropriate things at first, the way he always did, but something inside me had fundamentally changed, and his words no longer reached me. They simply passed through me like wind through a screen. By spring, I had filed for divorce. What I failed to anticipate, what I genuinely and foolishly never saw coming, was my family's response when I told them. I come from a close-knit family, or at least I had always believed that. My parents, Livette and Bowen, had shared 36 years of marriage. They were the type of parents who showed up to every graduation and recital, who remembered birthdays without being nudged. My brother Landis was 32, unmarried, still living in our childhood home, a large portion of which he had converted into a gaming setup. My sister Bryony was 28, freshly married, apparently convinced that 18 months of wedded life had qualified her as an expert on why marriages succeed or collapse. I called my mother first. I told her what had happened, what Caspian had done, that I had filed for divorce, that the custody arrangement was still unclear, and that I simply needed a few weeks of breathing room to stabilize. Perhaps I could bring the kids and stay in the guest room while things settled. There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that contains an entire, unspoken paragraph. Coralie, my mother said, we really don't have the space right now. I need you to understand something. My parents' house contains 4 bedrooms. Landis occupied 1. 2 sat completely empty. There was a finished basement with a pull-out sofa, a television, a separate bathroom, and a space where I had slept every Thanksgiving for the past decade when holiday evenings ran late. There was space. There was more than enough. Mom, I said carefully, I have 3 children. I just need a few weeks. You should think about this more seriously, she told me. Divorce is a permanent decision, Coralie. Caspian is a provider. These things happen in marriages. You work through them. He had been unfaithful. I'd found the evidence. I had not misread anything. And yet, somehow, I was being encouraged to reconsider. I drove over the following morning, pulled into the familiar driveway, climbed the porch steps I had raced up as a girl, and knocked on the door of the house I was raised in. My father answered. Bowen is not a cold person, or at least he never used to be. But when he saw me standing there with the children behind me, his expression did something complicated, like he had already been told what to say, like he had rehearsed it. Your mother and I talked, he said. We don't think having you here is a good idea. Dad. My voice came out smaller than I intended. I have nowhere else right now. I don't know yet what's happening with the house. The lawyer says it could take months. You could go back, he said. Try again. Saren was standing directly behind me, 9 years old, completely silent. I felt her hand find mine and I held it tightly. I'm not going back, I said. I'm asking you for help. He looked at me for a long moment. He looked past me at the children. Then he stepped back slightly and said, I'm sorry, Coralie. We just can't. And he began closing the door. Landis had retreated before it shut. My brother, 32 years old, living without paying rent in our parents' home. And he had the audacity to lean around our father's shoulder with a half grin and say, There literally is no room, Cor. You know how it is. He had an entire floor to himself. I stood on that porch and I did not cry. The urge was right there, pressing hard against the back of my throat. But Saren was holding my hand and Kayla had pressed herself against my leg, and Arlo had wrapped his arms around my waist from behind because at 4 years old he could sense that something was deeply wrong, even without understanding what. I was not going to fall apart in front of them. Okay, I said. Just that single word. Okay. Then Bryony appeared, because of course she did. My younger sister materialized in the hallway, as though she had been positioned there waiting for her entrance, arms folded, head tilted in that signature way she had when she was preparing to deliver something she had already decided was wisdom. Honestly, Coralie, she said, this feels a little rash. Caspian isn't a terrible person. People make mistakes. You have 3 children to consider. Their stability has to come before your feelings right now. Their stability. As though I hadn't been the architect of every piece of their stability for the entirety of their lives. As though I hadn't been there for every school pickup, every fever, every nightmare, every first day and final day and difficult day in between. As though there would have been any stability at all without me holding it together. I appreciate your input, I said. My voice was perfectly steady. Bryony shrugged, as though I was being unreasonable, as though I was the problem. I picked up the garbage bag from the porch. I buckled 3 children into a minivan with a cracked taillight, and I drove away from the house where I grew up. We spent that first night in a motel 30 minutes outside of town. It cost more than I wanted, but it was clean, it had 2 beds, and the children decided it was an adventure. Saren helped me settle Arlo in. Kayla announced she was sleeping in the middle because she was the most important one. I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. Small, unsteady, real. I lay awake that night after all 3 were asleep, and I thought about what I actually had. Not what I had lost, what remained. A part-time job I could likely push to full-time if I asked. A solid work history. A lawyer who had agreed to a payment plan. 3 children who were healthy and currently sleeping tangled together like a pile of puppies. And a promise I had made to myself on a porch. Watch what happens. I will skip the brutal middle section. Not because it wasn't real, but because this story was never really about the suffering. There was plenty of it. Weeks in a motel that stretched into a full month. A stretch where I lived on crackers for dinner because I had spent my last cash on new shoes for Arlo after a growth spurt made his old ones unwearable. There were nights I sat alone on the bathroom floor after the children drifted off to sleep and allowed myself to feel the full crushing weight of everything that had fallen apart. Then I stood up, splashed water on my face, and walked back out to be their mother. What I want to share with you now is what I constructed from that wreckage. My supervisor at the medical records office, a woman named Coralie, sharp and direct and surprisingly warm beneath it all, had been noticing that I arrived early and stayed well past closing. One afternoon, she asked me plainly whether I was going through something difficult. I told her yes. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered hours, full-time employment with benefits. I accepted before she had even finished the offer. I located a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't upscale but was secure, close to the girls' school, and within walking distance of a bus stop near Arlo's daycare. It was compact. The kitchen had exactly one drawer that functioned correctly. The bathroom tiles were a shade of beige that had likely been trendy sometime around 1987, but it belonged to us. I hung curtains the very first weekend we moved in. Kayla selected them, bright yellow, almost aggressively cheerful, and after I put them up and stepped back to look, I thought to myself, yes, all right, this is actually going to be fine. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. Caspian had stronger legal representation at the start, and he used every advantage it gave him. He pushed for a custody arrangement that was, to put it generously, built on a version of his involvement that didn't quite match reality. But here's the truth about fathers who haven't genuinely been doing the daily work. They have no evidence to show for it. I had 10 years of being the primary parent, supported by school records, medical files, and daycare sign-in logs. My attorney was meticulous. The custody evaluation did not reflect favorably on Caspian's claimed participation. I was awarded primary physical custody. He received every other weekend and 2 weeks during summer. He also owed 8 months of retroactive child support that his legal team attempted quite creatively to minimize. They were unsuccessful. My family learned about the outcome through mutual acquaintances. Our town is small and information moves quickly. My mother called. It was the first time she had reached out since the evening I told her I was filing. "We're so relieved things worked out," she said, speaking as though she had been quietly cheering me on the entire time, as though she had been in my corner from the beginning. "Are you?" I replied. "Coralie, you have to understand." "Mom," I said, "I do understand. I understood completely that evening on the porch." A silence followed. "We were worried you were acting too quickly." "I had 3 children in a garbage bag. I wasn't being impulsive. I was asking for help." She shifted into the particular mode she defaulted to when feeling cornered. The sighing, the gentle implication that I was being overly sensitive, that families go through rough stretches, that we all needed to move forward together. I let her finish. I didn't argue with any of it. When she was done, I told her I needed some time and that I would be in touch when I was ready. I haven't rushed that timeline. Bryony reached out approximately 4 months after the settlement, once the kids were settled into the apartment and life had begun to find something resembling a rhythm. She sent a lengthy message, multiple paragraphs, about how she had been doing a lot of reflecting and hoped we could reconnect and acknowledge that some of what she had said had come out the wrong way, and she hoped I could understand where she had been coming from. I read it twice. I thought about standing on that porch. I thought about their stability matters more than your feelings right now, delivered with that particular tilt of her head. I wrote back something brief and not unkind. I told her I appreciated her reaching out. I told her I needed more time. I told her I would contact her when I felt ready. She has not stopped trying since that exchange. Messages arrive every few weeks, growing longer and more elaborate, increasingly aware that she had misjudged something significant. I read every one. I take my time with all of them. Landis has never reached out at all, which is its own kind of answer. My father sent a card at Christmas with the words, "Thinking of you," written in his handwriting. I put it on the refrigerator for the children because it was their grandfather's handwriting, and that part exists separately from everything else. 6 months after the settlement, Terrell recommended me for a department lead position. It came with a salary increase that made me sit down for a moment when I saw the number. Not because the figure was extraordinary, it wasn't, but because it was entirely mine, earned through documented work, no one's charity or exception, simply mine. I upgraded to a 3-bedroom apartment in the same school district, slightly newer, with bathroom tiles that had never been fashionable at any point in recorded history, but every single drawer opened properly. Kayla got her own room and immediately coated one wall in chalkboard paint, covering every inch of it with drawings of horses she couldn't technically draw, but was deeply committed to trying. Saren, who had been quiet and watchful through every bit of it, came to me one evening while I stood at the stove making dinner. She leaned against the counter, watched me stir for a moment, and then said, "Mom, I think we're going to be okay." She was 10 by that point. "Yeah," I said. "I think so too." She returned to her homework. I kept stirring and I thought about a porch and a garbage bag and 3 words I had whispered to no one in particular. There is a specific variety of justice that never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic confrontation or a moment where you witness the exact expression on someone's face when they recognize they were wrong. It is far quieter than that. It accumulates gradually. It is a lease signed in your own name. It is a savings account that continues to grow. It is 3 children falling asleep in their own beds inside a home you built from absolutely nothing. And they wake up the next morning asking for pancakes without any idea what it cost you to reach this point, which is precisely how you want it. Caspian eventually moved in with the person he had been involved with. That arrangement lasted roughly a year from what I have gathered. He currently rents a 1-bedroom on the east side of town. He takes the kids every other weekend, and to his credit, he does show up. I don't speak to him unless the conversation concerns the children. We communicate through text messages. It is efficient. I have stopped waiting for an apology from my parents or my siblings, not because I have decided they don't owe me one, because they absolutely do, but because I have learned something over these past 18 months that nobody ever told me before. Waiting for an apology is its own form of staying. And I have no interest in staying anywhere I had to beg to be let inside. Last month, Saren's school held a family showcase, one of those evenings where children present projects and parents walk around examining display boards and drinking weak coffee poured from folding tables. I attended. Of course I attended. I always do. Saren's project was on resilience. She had spent weeks researching it, the science behind it, the psychology, what separates people who recover from those who remain buried in what broke them. She had built an entire display board, hand-lettered title across the top, every piece done herself. At the bottom, in smaller lettering, she had written, "Resilient people don't wait to be rescued. They figure out the next step." She was standing beside it when I approached, watching my face as I read with that careful, measured expression she carries. "I wrote that part myself," she said. "It didn't come from any source." I looked at her for a moment. My daughter, 10 years old, already grasping things that took me 34 years to understand. "It's really good," I told her. She nodded, completely satisfied. "I know. I am not sharing this story because I want you to feel sorry for me. Sympathy is not what I'm after. I have a dishwasher that works, a department lead title, and 3 children who are loudly, wildly, completely themselves, and I am doing more than fine. I share it because I know there are women hearing this right now who are standing at some version of that same door, carrying children and bags and shattered trust, asking for help from the people who were supposed to love them without condition, and the door is closing. And it feels like something ending. It isn't. I promise you it is the beginning. The people who closed that door on me are still living the same lives they were living 18 months ago. Same house, same routine, same everything. While I built something entirely new, starting from a motel room and a garbage bag and 3 words I whispered to myself on a porch. There is no sweeter outcome than that, none at all. If someone ever told you there was no room for you, what did you do with that? Tell me in the comments, because I believe this community understands something that took me far too long to realize. The people who say there is no space for you are usually just frightened of who you will become once you go and create your own.